Hey, Kevin here with Skylabs. Thanks for checking in again. We've got another video. We're doing a shootout between the Mobile Fidelity One-Step Muddy Waters Folk Singer versus the Analog Productions 33 1/3. If you're looking for a knockout, drag out, blood in the streets type verdict, I'm not going to lie, it's not there. I do hope you stick around because there's something way more interesting than that. So stick around. There's a lot to absorb here. Thanks. So first, I kind of want to go over, the process in which we set up this blindfold test to see which one of these pressings is better. And there's some holes in the test, and I'm going to explain those too. So the gear we used was an AccuPhase E202. And there's a specific reason I chose this integrated amplifier, and that's because it has potentiometers, so you can balance two phono inputs using the same phono preamplifier, which is important for balancing the output levels of two cartridges and or balancing the levels of two records. And that's why we chose the E202. We used two U-turn Orbit Plus turntables. They were both factory out of the box, going into a pair of Sennheiser HD 560 headphones. So we hooked the two Orbit turntables up to the AccuPhase and wanted to get a test to see if both outputs of the cartridges were equal. I ran the AccuPhase into an older set of Advents, and we used a test record that has tones on it to check decibel levels using an app level meter. Thankfully, both cartridges were balanced. We didn't have to use any attenuation on those pots on the back of the AccuPhase, which is good. But it is really important that both cartridges are equal. If one is a decibel or 2 decibels, it's enough to want to favor that particular record or that source, even though it's the cartridge that's doing it. That's why having two of the exact same turntables with two of the exact same brand new cartridges is so important, just to make sure you're not favoring one of the two records over a different characteristic or a different dB level from the output of the cartridge. And the Orbits pass with flying colors. So before we go too much further, I do want to acknowledge the holes in the test, and there are a couple. And the first would be we don't have the 45 RPM Analog Productions version of the Muddy Waters album. We are using Eric's copy. He has a copy, and we didn't have time to order another one, 45 version for the test, being the One-Step is a 45 version. So technically, the Analog Productions has a slight disadvantage there. In another way, it has a slight disadvantage. Eric's copy has been played before. The One-Step version we used was brand new out of the box. However, Eric's really particular when he handles his records. We cleaned both of them using an ultrasonic cleaner that Eric brought over, a Human Guru or something like that. I probably butchered that word, but to make sure that they were both dust and debris free. So the way we did the test was to let the listener sit down in front of the AccuPhase while the turntables were blocked by a curtain, and allow the listener to switch between the two turntables as they wanted without knowing which one they were currently on, which would be a true blind test, which is what we wanted. And that's what we got. Neither of us knew which one we were listening to until after the test was complete. So the two people that took the test were myself and a friend of mine, Eric. And Eric is, I don't know anybody that listens to more records than Eric. That's really his favorite pastime, is listening to vinyl records. So usually when I talk to Eric, I usually hear about a couple of records that are really impressive to him sonically. So he's always paying attention to, he's always trying to find the best sounding records. So I thought it'd be really good to bring somebody like Eric along to validate the test or to maybe spar a little bit on things we're each hearing differently. And then for me, while I've got a degree in audio engineering and I've spent a lot of time in studios doing critical listening, I do not consider myself an audiophile. I do not spend hours and hours and hours a day in front of really high-end audio equipment critically listening. That's not my day. My day is usually fixing stuff. And while if I'm critically listening, I'm usually listening for little bits of distortion or balancing issues between amplifiers, stuff like that. So my ears do get use. However, I am not an audiophile. Also, none of these records were provided. Obviously, these are our records. The equipment's ours. Nobody provided anything. We have no bias. There's no reason for us to want the analog productions to sound better than the mobile fidelity or vice versa. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because I first sat down to listen, and I did the test first. I put on the headphones. Eric started both turntables, and I listened to the first turntable for probably, 15 seconds, kind of building a base, a foundation, what my ears were hearing. And then I switched over to the other one, and I was extremely happy to realize that both records had a similar decibel level. They were very, very even. And I would go back and forth, and I did not hear anything jumping out at me as far as decibels, which is great because that is where the conundrum comes into play, in that I don't think you can level match two vinyl records using a volume pot or an attenuator, and I'll explain why. Both of these are very high quality products. Both companies take a lot of pride in making sure they are delivering their customer the best sounding product they can. Now, we all know, because of the news lately, Mobile Fidelity has been using DSD masters in some of their products, including this one. However, we also have to agree that both mastering engineers know what they're doing. And if we can agree on that they're high quality, top products with the best mastering engineers possible, then we can agree on, I think, most things going out, which is if a boost in decibels is perceived as having better sound, then you have to allow a mastering engineer to use decibels to make something sound better. I hope that makes sense. The reason is both engineers know the limitations of vinyl. And the only way to get more gain is by sacrificing something else. As in, mastering, especially for vinyl, is a juggling act. If you want to get more volume, you have to reduce the dynamic range. So it's constantly juggling. If by reducing the dynamic range and getting higher levels, you end up with stuff like Metallica's Death Magnetic. That's how the Loudness Wars happened. They traded hot mixes for dynamic range. They squashed it so they could maximize it. So if one is getting favored because of a couple decibels, then it's also being hindered somewhere. Now, that becomes a personal taste where if, let's say, that mastering engineer has to go, okay, I want to find the happy medium to where I'm getting this mix as hot as possible and retaining as much dynamic range as possible. Or they have to make a decision of the dynamic range isn't as important, let's get a hotter mix. So those are really, at that level, when we're talking about these two types of products, is semantics, in my opinion. I'll tell you right now, The difference between these two records, in my opinion, is there's a little bit more top end on the Analog Productions one. But I mean, it is small. It's a small boost. And to me, and to Eric felt the same way. We both came to the same conclusion. Eric did say he preferred the Analog Productions one, knowing and agreeing that really the only difference was a little bit of top end, a little bit of brilliance on the top end. But they're both so similar, and they're both excellent. And that's the problem. I would almost equate this at like comparing two top athletes or two luxury vehicles. And we're going to do another test, but I don't want to do test of two records at this caliber. I don't think it's interesting. I don't think there's enough differences. Both these production companies and both these mastering engineers know what they're doing to make really, really good sounding records. So both of those records sound really, really good. The difference might be, which price do you want to pay? Because there are physical differences, and you might root for one company or the other. I like to think that if I'm buying an analog record at a premium, if at all possible, I want it to be from an analog source. So I am always going to root for that product. However, I don't know if the decision to purchase which one of these should be whether or not it's digital. It might be, I like the packaging for the One-Step, or I like the price of the Analog Productions because it's quite a bit cheaper. But I don't think blind testing records at this level of quality is very interesting, at least for somebody that does not consider themselves an audiophile. This is much more suited to people that want to talk about how this particular record made the music more musical. Throw up. That's not me. I don't care. I'd rather find records that, this pressing from 2005 sounds horrible. This one from 2018 sounds amazing, so that people can kind of be informed, or get an opinion before they have to buy one, where it's a night and day difference. It's obvious. This is not obvious. This was semantics. And personally, I don't have a winner. I think Eric has every right to like the Analog Production ones better, because that's his taste. That's what he heard. That's what he likes better. And that's totally fine. But for me, I'd be happy with either one. And this is even more of a point. I don't know if, and maybe we'll do this test. Okay, hold on. So this test would actually make more sense with comparing two records like this at this caliber, where they're so good and they're so similar. I would say if I said to Eric, I said, okay, I'm going to play you that same song 5 times. And 3 of those times, I'm going to play one record, and 2 of the times I'm going to play the other one. You write down which ones are which. And if he could figure out which ones are which, that would be a better test. If I wasn't going back and forth with that switch, going from record to record to record to record, and I had a 5-minute break in between listens, I honestly don't know if I would have been able to hear the subtlety in that top end boost in the Analog Productions version. So, and I want to make one more point, because if you were to try to level match 2 records, where do you level match them? As in, you've got peaks and valleys. You constantly have, quieter passages, or maybe even, nothing but the room mic. And then you'll have a big, crescendo, cymbal, kick, guitar, everything hits all at once and it spikes. So do you level the spikes, or do you try and level the middle? because you can't do both without using compression. And once you add compression to make them level, you have two new masters, if that makes sense. I guess, in my opinion, there's no real way to truly compare two records other than just listening to them. So it's all opinion, and it's not much more than that. But man, was that fun. I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about that stuff, working it in my head, going, trying to find the solution. And there just isn't one. The best you can do is to make sure your cartridges outputs are balanced. And then after that, you have to, in my opinion, you have to view the extra volume as part of the sound. Otherwise, you're not letting volume dictate what sounds good. And what does sound good? I mean, talk about a head spin. Anyway, have a great one. I hope you're enjoying your record. Thanks. Also, thanks to Eric for coming over and helping yesterday. That was huge. It was a lot of fun. We're definitely going to do it again. We're going to do it with a good record, though, and a crappy record. And we'll actually make it fun. So, yeah, thanks for doing that. Thanks to everybody that's commented and shared and liked and subscribed the last week. I really appreciate it. It's really awesome to see people engaging with the content, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, and have a great day. Thanks.